There's a clip on Instagram of Jude Law, like within the last 2 weeks, on this talk show in London. And the host of the talk show was this woman who had no idea that the cottage was not real, that the cottage didn't exist. She was heartbroken to find out that this cottage didn't exist. My name is Jon Hutman. I'm a Hollywood production designer. Today we're going to break down a movie I designed, The Holiday, directed by Nancy Meyers. I've worked as a production designer for, let's just say, over 30 years, and I'm probably best known for my work with Nancy Meyers. I love this movie. There are a couple of great mysteries surrounding The Holiday. One of them is, where was the real Holiday cottage? And people are surprised and sometimes dismayed to learn that we built that cottage, but it is based on a real cottage that Nancy found in a listing of vacation rentals in the National Trust. I just looked it up online. It is still there. It's in a part of the UK called Herefordshire. When we made this movie, they used to have printed guidebooks, and the National Trust protects historic properties, and you can actually rent some of them and live in them. So she found this picture of this charming little cottage, like a kid would draw. A 2-story cottage with a door in the center and windows on either side, and she said that's what the cottage should look like. There's essentially 2 rooms downstairs, a bedroom and a little tiny bathroom. Okay. Tucked in under the eaves upstairs. So when you walk in the front door, straight in front of you, there's this tight little staircase, and the beam is so low that when Amanda walks down the stairs, she bumps her head. To the left is the living room, to the right is the kitchen, and then behind the kitchen, there's a little office, which in my mind was architecturally added onto the cottage. So at the end of the movie, she runs, she gets to the front door, and she opens the front door, and he's not there. Well, it's a small cottage, so if you don't want to have him upstairs, you want to follow her into the kitchen, and then there, through that little passageway, you see him in the office. And so that room primarily needs to service the story and the action that happens there. First thing you'll notice in the kitchen is the light blue cabinet. It's not exactly the same color as the trim on the exterior, but it's related to the trim on the exterior. And that color, which I would maybe call French blue or periwinkle, has a little bit of purple in it. And if you notice, the natural stone walls of the cottage have a little bit of ochre or yellow. The contrast between those colors makes the cabinets lift off the walls. The buzzword of this cottage is cozy, but it's about having every piece of furniture tucked into its place. Limited palette, consistent patterns. How does a young woman in her 30s live in this old house? How do we make the house a little bit feminine, a little bit contemporary? That texture, I would say, creates the cozy feeling of the cottage. Typically, and in the case of these 2 houses, we build the second floor separately from the first floor. If you build the second floor on top of the first floor, especially in a set like Iris's cottage, it's very hard to get lights to come through the ceiling. Not that natural light actually comes through the ceiling, but to make everything beautiful and make everyone look beautiful, it's important to be able to light. Fireplace in a cottage like this is practical. That's how they heated the house back in the day. Over the mantle, there are these shelves, exactly the width of the fireplace, and they're loaded with ironstone and Delftware. You have 2 armchairs, upholstered, but 2 different styles of chairs, slightly different shapes, and different fabric on each chair. And those things are kind of anchored by the solid color ottoman in the center. And another cute detail between the 2 armchairs, there's this end table, which is actually an antique military drum. You don't expect a drum to be an end table, you know what I mean? It makes her an interesting person with an eye.
I'm here.
What I want to do is be able to look at how all of the colors play through the movie. So when you cut from Iris's cottage in the UK to Amanda's house, it's about contrasting the other home in the set. Another one of the big mysteries of the holiday is this painting in Amanda's entryway, which is a white dress against a red and black background. That painting is by a French artist named Thomas Fouguerolles. I might be saying that wrong. We found this painting in a book called Bright Young Things. And there was a woman, I can't remember her name, and there was a portrait of her with this painting sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. And as Nancy and I were going through it, she's like, oh my God, like that feels like something that a sophisticated young woman would have in her home. Amanda's house was designed by a well-known architect named Wallace Neff, and it was actually his own home. So we used that house as both the front and back exteriors of the set that you see in the movie. But when you walk into the real Wallace Neff house, it is dark. So we added lights and the feeling of skylights and flooded the interior with light because that's the experience we wanted Iris to have. What was so important for Amanda's house is that we contrast it with the little stone cottage in England. When she goes to the gate and sees this bright, sunny, white Spanish exterior, it couldn't be more different from the quaint little 4-window stone cottage in Surrey. And the house, when you walk inside, is flooded with light. There are natural materials, like there's a sisal carpet in the entryway and another one in the living room. There's something about that slip-covered white furniture, which is light and clean and a little bit summery, which if you've lived your whole life in a little stone cottage in England, you would definitely feel like you weren't in Kansas anymore.
I think we should leave these young folks and get back to our bedpan.
Our guiding sort of aesthetic was what I would call the Belgian style of interior design. You can now get this furniture at Restoration Hardware and all over. At the time we made the movie, this was quite new. We really used as our primary kind of style reference and guide a book called Inex, which is published by a Belgian company called Beta Plus. And when you look at the style in the Belgian houses, you start to see very simple linen slip-covered furniture, stone floors, bleached wood, trim and beams. There is a kind of blank slate emptiness that feels correct for the character. If everything is too monochromatic, it starts to look like Miami Beach. In the living room, there are these 2 wing chairs, and they're upholstered in white linen to match the white linen sofa in the room. A wing chair is a traditionally English, more masculine piece of furniture. But as soon as you slip cover it in white linen and put a skirt around it, it can live comfortably with the couch next to it. And when you go into the kitchen, the cabinetry is black and the appliances are black. That contrast of the black cabinets against the white walls, no upper cabinets. There's this lovely little wingback settee in the kitchen, which separates the working part of the kitchen from what would have originally been an exterior hallway. And the French doors are open and you see all this greenery on the terrace, beautiful plants inside of the house. Those are signature elements that make the audience feel that they're in Los Angeles.
Are you married? Tell me fast.
No.
The third house in the triangle of this movie is Graham's house. And Graham, the character played by Jude Law, who happens to be Iris's brother, we think, as Amanda thinks, that he's this drunken British cad.
Oh, you're not Iris.
And when she goes to his house to see him, she discovers that he's actually a single dad with 2 young daughters. So his home is this surprisingly warm English family home.
Yes, except for I'm sorry about the wine.
We shot the interior of Graham's house in a practical location in Los Angeles in the Los Feliz neighborhood. But the exterior, where Amanda drives up in her little red Mini Cooper, walks through the brick wall and through the front garden, that house is what they call a mill house in Surrey. We used a lot of black trim, not just dark wood trim, black trim. And I think that makes the set a little bit contemporary and a little bit masculine. And it really shows us this other side of Graham. There is yellow tile on the walls of the kitchen, which is kind of typical of a 1920s LA house. But we changed the stove to an Aga cooker, which is a very typical and kind of exclusively British stove. That one detail makes me believe the rest of the house is in England. Graham is a book publisher, so it makes sense that he has an office at home that is lined with books and bookshelves. And the bookshelves are black, but if you look very carefully, we painted the backs of the bookshelves with this rich, slightly orangey red. And it's those little pops of color which I think make the house feel contemporary. And I believe that it's a man's house. And I think it's particularly that library and that vintage poster libro, which means book.
I'm Mr. Napkinhead.
If you were to just look at still photos of the 3 houses, I think you would pretty easily match Iris to the cottage. But I think you might mistake Amanda's house as belonging to our original impression of Graham. I would imagine him living in Amanda's house the way that it is.
I think what I've got is something slightly resembling gumption.
You know, my job as a production designer is less about trend-setting styles and much more about finding the elements that help illuminate the characters who inhabit these homes. For Iris, we get this quintessential English cottage that is both timeless, classic, and could not be more cozy. But for her, it feels a little bit tight and claustrophobic, whereas Amanda's house is all about stylish, contemporary, big, sunny Los Angeles home. But for her, it's become a little bit empty. What Nancy tapped into was this way that people care about their homes and create homes that reflect not just who they are today, but who they would like to be. Hold on, sorry, they're cutting the trees. So, oh no, this is my gardeners in my yard. Okay, unplug from this. Okay, we're back. Okay, thank you. Sorry, there's like leaves. Okay,